We're coming, and we ain't backing down.
We don't need a bunch of cats in here looking in the mirror.
Everybody just do your job. You understand that?
Hey, will you shut up?
I'm bitterly disappointed with the officiating today.
Guys being dudes.
And they run through our like through a tin horn, man.
Thank you, Lee. Thank you to our subscribers at splitsindoor.com. We really appreciate you. Hope you're enjoying your end to this year or whenever you're listening to this episode. Richard Johnson, I'm Alex Kirshner, and we just had one of my favorite conversations that we've had on the show in a long time.
This was awesome. It was awesome to have KVV on. He is tremendous, absolutely tremendous. And obviously, as the preeminent subject matter expert, as far as I'm concerned, in the golf sphere of the Brawl of the Wild rivalry. Got to say that one slow. Montana and Montana State. It's one of those like intensely regional contests that is as hate-fueled as any of them can ever be. It's one of those classic what makes the sport great. And as someone who has quite literally lived it, both just in his personal life and as a player for one of these teams, it was really, really cool to have him on and have this conversation.
Yeah, this is Kevin Van Valkenburg, also known widely as KVV. You probably read his work over the years at ESPN or the Baltimore Sun. He is now director of content at Fried Egg Golf, which is one of Richard's and my favorite websites and YouTube channels, etc. And we wanted to talk with KVV about the ins and outs and what it's like to live in one of the great rivalries in college football, but not one that gets a ton of attention beyond a really catchy, and we will learn in this episode, not entirely organic rivalry nickname, the Brawl of the Wild. This is the Montana Grizzlies in Missoula, Montana, against the Montana State Bobcats in Bozeman, Montana. And the immediate occasion for recording this is that a couple days after we do record it, they're going to play each other in an FCS playoff semifinal. So this will be the exceedingly rare year where these teams play twice. But who knows? You might be finding this episode anytime. And our hope is that the discussion that we have with KVV about the nature and the history of this rivalry and the cultures that drive it will stand the test of time. Just some quick biographicals here that might make this conversation make more sense, though I think it will all pretty much come easily to you, I hope. They've been playing this rivalry since 1897. They have not missed out since a major global conflict that you have heard of in the middle of the 1940s. They've played every year.
Don't know that everybody's heard about that. You don't know.
It's true. Actually, there might be some people who haven't heard about it yet. These teams spent much of the 20th century in separate conferences. Montana was playing in the Proto Pac-12, the Pacific Coast Conference, with USC, Stanford, UCLA, etc. Basically most of the old Pac-12, and then dropped out of high major football to go to the 1AA level, which changed names over the years, and start the Big Sky, along with Montana State, which had been in the Rocky Mountain Athletic with a lot of teams that are today in Division II. So they were sort of on different tiers of the sport, and then they met up to form probably the most regionally consistent conference in college football, the Big Sky. Definitely the one with the best logo, in my opinion. And this has been a great rivalry that came to people's attention outside of Montana, I would say slowly and then quickly, Richard, with like a few big events over the years, College Game Day making an appearance. We'll talk about that. But has had iconic moments on iconic moments on iconic moments. 16-game win streak around the turn of the century in Montana's favor, which really changed a lot about how Montana State operated. I was excited to get to learn more about this rivalry, and I know you were too.
Yeah, this is great. And I'm really, really glad KVV came on to chop it up with us. And I'm really, really glad that you are, as a subscriber to splitzoneduo.com, are checking this episode out as well. Let's roll it.
KVV, when you were playing against Montana State, who were those guys to you other than the football team you were trying to beat?
You know, the honest truth of it is, if growing up as a kid in Montana, the Montana State kids were kind of like the little brother. They were the kids who were not quite good enough to play for the Grizz, who sort of had a little chip on their shoulder. They were, kids from Eastern Montana who didn't get recruited by Montana. It was definitely a little bit of condescension, a little disrespect on our part, because the Grizz were the, preeminent program in the state of Montana. And you'd said something about you if you were a Grizz or a Bobcat, and everybody kind of wanted to be a Grizz, and you sort of settled for being a Bobcat. And I do not think that is true now at all.
I think the most interesting thing to me, KVP, about this rivalry is, and you see this across the country with small college rivalries, but you certainly see it in a place where there's nothing else, right? Like there are small college rivalries in Ohio, but there's also Ohio State, Michigan. Like there is a very unique dichotomy of the small college rivalry in the place where that is it. Like there is nothing else.
Truly. So the closest NFL team would be the Seahawks, which is a 10-hour drive from Missoula. The Broncos would be maybe the second closest. That is a 14-hour drive from where I grew up, probably like 11 hours from Bozeman. So Montana State was the thing that you really invested emotionally in growing up. Like I didn't really have an NFL team that I felt a specific connection to. I just wanted to be a Grizzly football player. And you would go to the games when it was 10 below and you'd stand there and you'd try to catch while they were practicing kickoffs. They had a big grass section behind the one of the end zones. They didn't even have seats in one of the end zones for most of my growing up. And I remember catching field goals and thinking that was the coolest like thing an 11, 12-year-old could do, and just dreaming of that. And I very true. Like it isn't just that there's no pro teams. There's no other equivalent to that. If you grew up in Texas, there's Texas A&M, there's Texas Tech. You could in theory, play for SMU. You could play for, any number of places. Even Oklahoma State, Oklahoma. You might, in Montana, it's just Montana State. Nobody dreams of like, man, I really want to play for Western Tech, or I want to play for Carroll College, or I want to play for MSU Northern. Like it's a clear step down. Even the kids who would like every once in probably 5 or 10 years, guys might get recruited to go play at Washington State or Oregon. And it was almost like you looked at those kids with kind of like a sneering contempt. Well, we didn't want you anyway. Ryan Leaf was that way. Like Ryan Leaf was a couple years older than I was. And I remember being in the stands in a game against him. And I was like, I don't want that guy to play for the Grizz. Like, he should definitely go play for Washington State. Like the heck with him. Just because that kind of regionalism, that I guess provincialism was so strong. It was in our blood. It was like, we didn't have that stuff. So we had to hold on to the Grizz and the Bobcats that much harder.
KVV, your Montana Grizzlies football bio page does not lie that you're from Missoula originally, right?
I am. Yeah. Hopefully it points out that I had maybe 1 career tackle or 2 career tackles. It's going to dispute. Not
to condescend to our guy, but when you said his profile page, I was a little impressed actually.
It's minimal. They have you with an egg picture, which I think is a little insulting.
Yeah.
You're very well known. Like you're all around the internet. The fact that they couldn't boost your profile picture from fried egg or something is a little insulting, but anyway.
I think maybe I was taught journalism at Montana in 2015 as part of a fellowship, and I was trying to teach the journalists to be aggressive in their journalism covering it. I don't think the SID particularly liked it, so they may have scrubbed me from as much of the internet as they can. Yeah, I was an all-state football player in Missoula. I was a tight end and a linebacker, and I was I'm only 6 feet tall on a it's like standing up as tall as I can. And so I wasn't really ever going to be like, the right size to play big time college football. And I was not that fast either. And I also, honestly, just truly, I think what held me back was I just didn't have the thirst for violence that you need, like at the point of contact. So I could tackle guys. I could see where the ball was going, but I couldn't like blow them up and make them sort of whimper in pain. That was kind of part of what limited my abilities as a football player. But yeah, I grew up going to all the Grizz games as a kid, going to Grizzly football camp. I never once really, I remember I got recruiting calls a little bit from Montana State, but I was just like, yeah, I'm not interested. Like I'm only ever going to be a Grizz. And I think that was the way a lot of kids that I grew up with felt. Which
really speaks to the Grizz being the team of the state, at least at this time.
Certainly in the 90s. Yeah. Yeah, it was just, they were a brand. Like Don Reed was the football coach. He was sort of a legendary passing football coach. He'd coached at Portland State. He was, they were, and this is a time in the 90s when, they're running the veer option in every school in the state of Montana, and probably like kind of throughout the country in a lot of ways. But Montana was throwing the ball. We had 4 wide receivers in every play. We didn't have any tight ends on the roster. It was just like, it was fun. It was like basketball on grass, and it made for like a really cool brand. And Montana State was very much not that. It was still kind of like grinded out, wing tee situation. I remember they had like one year they had an offense with like 3 running backs in it, which is just unthinkable today. So Montana State always felt like they were kind of behind the times. Like Montana was like, we discovered electricity, and Montana State was like, we're still like banging rocks against each other, trying to start fire in a cave somewhere. That's just the way that it felt. And so it's surreal for me now to kind of, I live in the East Coast in Baltimore, but to sort of follow it, over the internet and watch occasionally and whatever, and just to see like how different it is. Like Bozeman is this cosmopolitan town, and all these rich people live there, and it's like sort of, it's like Sun Valley almost, where it's just become this kind of thing of class. It was a kind of a cow town, when in the 90s when I was growing up, everyone joked that you didn't want to go to Montana State because there was only like 35% of the students there were girls, were women. And so you was like, oh man, you don't want to go to Montana State, man. You'll never get a date. Go. And now I think it's flipped in a lot of ways. And so it's just, for me, it's like, man, what happened in the last 25 years?
The dichotomy between the two is so interesting. And we're going to go a little bit further into that in a second. But just, you talk about being all state football in high school in Montana. Like, I'm sure there's a lot of 8-man football going on. Like, what are we talking about as far as like the football landscape of the state?
Sure. So I always joke, it's a little bit like that Frank DeFord thing. He called his biography the world's tallest midget. Is like, that was like being one of the best players in the state of Montana, right? All right. So there's 14 schools that were at my level. I think now there's 15 or 16, but it was like class AA. And so a league football game for me would be 6 hours away in Billings, Montana. So we would get on the bus at 2 or 3 in the morning, drive there, show up at 10, play a noon game or whatever against one of the other like schools. And we're talking the top level schools there probably had like 1,000 kids and up. And then there was all different, there was class A, class B, class C. Class C is where you really get into the 8-man football stuff. And so, there was, for the most part, there was less than 1 million people. There is now just over 1 million in Montana, but it was less than 1 million people. I think it was like 800,000 people in the state all throughout sort of my growing up. So it wasn't like this was like, a huge, I mean, there's more people that live within 5 miles of my house in Baltimore than lived in the entire state of Montana. And so, you had to kind of put it a little bit into perspective, but it also like, it taught you how to be tough, man. There's some tough like farm kids out there. There's some big kids. And there was, it was always like, there was an Air Force base in Great Falls, Montana. So it was like the only minorities would ever be, there were kids who their parents were stationed in the Air Force base or whatever. So everybody was like, oh man, they got this running back in Great Falls this year. His dad was in the Air Force. He's going to tear it up and stuff. It was like kind of almost like a mystery. And like, oh man, like there's only like 3 or 4 African-American kids in the whole state who are playing football, but they're all coming out of Great Falls or Billings that are going to be great. So it was just like it wasn't like a landscape of like, you could really brag about that much. We would go play in camps against Idaho or against Colorado and stuff, and you'd see like, oh, well, this is kind of like real football or whatever. But yeah, man, it was still like you'd have to learn. I mean, we played in a state championship game my junior year in Missoula, and it was, not kidding, with the wind chills 25 below.
Oh,
so it was I think it was like 10.
Yeah. What does a tackle feel like in that?
I mean, it feels like you're bouncing off concrete for sure. It's you learn, I think, as a kid growing up, like how to kind of deal with cold. But it was one of the coldest days, I think, of that entire year. But there was no like, oh yeah, we'll postpone the game, or there's, no concern. It was just like the field was kind of like glass. I remember we couldn't get, it was frozen. So we had to like put on these like special cleats that were supposed to like help us kind of dig into the turf, and it just didn't really help at all. It was just kind of a mess. It was kind of, completely hard, but we ended up losing that state championship game, which still kind of haunts me. But like a ton of those guys in that game ended up playing for the Grizz, and maybe 1 or 2 might've played for the Bobcats, but they might've took, 10 people to play for the Grizz. So it was just like that game, kind of spoke to like how the rivalry looked at this point, is the Grizz could kind of pick and choose whoever they wanted from the best high school players in Montana. And interestingly enough, like what part of what made Montana good is they were good about picking like kids from Florida or California who had just been not quite good enough to get like D1 scholarships here and there, right? So we had like a bunch of great corners from Florida, or we a couple times got running backs or wide receivers from California, and we'd pick off a few kids from Oregon and stuff here. So it wasn't entirely Montana kids, but you could fill in some of your like speed positions and skill positions from the states where there's such an abundance of talent in Florida that there was no way that all of those kids were going to get a scholarship, and they might have one person recruiting that area, and they would manage to land a great corner every couple of years there from Montana.
You've told me, with Brian Ayat, who's a quarterback whose son is, as we record this, the quarterback of Montana, and he's from Hawaii. So
yes,
I wonder what that was like for him.
Whew, jeez.
Yeah, so all the Hawaiian kids too, that was another part of this. At some point along in the early 90s, Montana kind of made some sort of inroads in Hawaii. And so they'd get, kids who probably weren't quite good enough to play for the University of Hawaii, but, didn't want to go like so far that they were, all the way on the East Coast or whatever. They just needed some kind of connection. There was a strength coach who was Hawaiian, and that sort of helped recruit that area. And Brian Ayat, so the greatest football player to ever play for Montana is this guy named Dave Dickinson. He led them to a national championship in 1995. He's a legend in the CFL. If he'd have been 2-3 inches taller, like he'd have been Drew Brees. Like he was an unbelievable talent. He could just one of the most accurate, smartest quarterbacks ever. The guy who came right after him was Brian Ayat, who was, I think, from Honolulu or somewhere around that area. And he was like a very different quarterback than Dickinson. Dickinson had been like a homegrown kid in Montana, Great Falls, Montana, had been sort of just this true legend. And Brian Ayat was just this Hawaiian surfer kid, like very laid back. It was freezing cold for all these Hawaiian kids. They just absolutely bulk up. And, when we had outdoor practice, we had no indoor practice facility back then. And so you'd have to practice in the snow and all that stuff. But Ayat could sling it. I mean, he was such a mellow, chill guy, but he could absolutely throw darts all over the field. And he had like a sensational year his sophomore year, which is the year that his son, Kealia Ayat, is now, and led us to the national championship. We were 14-0 going into that national championship. And then, Alex, you might remember this, we played against Randy Moss against Marshall. So
yep.
I'm one of the few. I obviously didn't. I was a redshirt freshman. I did not play, but I like to joke with people that I briefly occupied the same athletic universe as Randy Moss. We were like, they had like a big banquet beforehand, and I remember like walking through the hallway and like nodding at Randy Moss as he walked past me to go back into the room from like going to the bathroom. I was like, oh man, like that guy can't be that good, right? Like, and I think he caught 10 balls for 250 yards and 4 touchdowns.